Jahannam. Jahannam is the first and outermost level of Islamic hell, named after hell itself, as Jahannam is also the general Arabic term for the entire concept of the afterlife's place of punishment. According to Islamic tradition, this is the least severe of the 7 levels, though it remains a place of significant suffering and purification. The Quran references this structure in Surah Al-Hijr, verses 43 through 44, which state that hell has 7 gates, each assigned to a specific portion of condemned souls. This first level is designated primarily for Muslims who committed major sins, known as kaba'ir in Arabic, but maintained their fundamental belief in Allah and the core tenets of Islam throughout their lives. Islamic scholars interpret Jahannam as a place of cleansing rather than eternal damnation for believers, where fire burns away the spiritual impurities accumulated through worldly transgressions. The sins that lead to this level include missing obligatory prayers without valid excuse, intentionally breaking fasts during Ramadan, consuming alcohol or intoxicants, engaging in riba, which is usury or interest-based transactions, neglecting to pay zakat or the mandatory charity, and showing grave disrespect toward one's parents. According to various hadith traditions, particularly those found in the collections of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the punishment at this level is temporary for believers, with the duration based on the severity of their sins and ultimately subject to Allah's mercy. Some hadiths suggest that Prophet Muhammad will intercede on behalf of believers at this level, requesting their removal once they have been sufficiently purified. The fire here burns at the lowest intensity among the 7 levels, though it remains scorching by any earthly comparison. Hadith traditions describe it as having walls and gates that will be locked shut, preventing escape until the designated purification period concludes. This level represents the Islamic theological concept that divine justice must be balanced with divine mercy, demonstrating that even believers face consequences for their wrongdoing, but that faith provides an eventual path to paradise after purification is complete. Laza. Laza is the second level of Jahannam, mentioned specifically by name in the Quran in Surah Al-Ma'arij, verses 15 through 16, and again in Surah Al-Layl, verse 14. The name Laza translates to blazing flame or fierce blaze in Arabic, indicating an intensification of punishment beyond the first level. According to Islamic scholarly tradition, particularly as interpreted by medieval commentator Ibn Kathir in his famous tafsir, this level is assigned primarily to Christians who were exposed to the message of Islam but consciously rejected it, including those who maintained belief in the Trinity or claimed divinity for Prophet Isa, known as Jesus in Christian tradition. The Quranic description of Laza is particularly vivid and unsettling, with Surah Al-Ma'arij describing flames that strip away the skin from the skull, while verse 15 speaks of fire that plucks out the extremities of the body. Islamic eschatology teaches that the skin regenerates continuously in hell, allowing the punishment to repeat eternally, without the mercy of death or unconsciousness. Some hadith traditions claim this fire burns at a temperature 70 times hotter than any worldly flame, though scholars debate the literal versus metaphorical nature of such measurements. The assignment of Christians to this specific level stems from interpretive traditions rather than explicit Quranic text, and modern Islamic scholars acknowledge that interpretations vary across different schools of thought. The theological reasoning behind this placement centers on the Islamic concept that Christians and Jews receive divine revelation through their own prophets and scriptures, making their rejection of Muhammad's prophethood a conscious denial of truth rather than simple ignorance. The level represents punishment for what Islamic tradition considers the sin of shirk, or associating partners with Allah, which Muslims believe occurs when ascribing divine attributes to Prophet Isa. The blazing nature of Laza, with its specific targeting of the head and extremities, symbolizes the removal of the spiritual covering that prevented inhabitants from recognizing and accepting Islamic monotheism during their worldly lives. Al-Hutama. Al-Hutama is the third level of Jahannam, explicitly named and described in Surah Al-Humazah, verses 4 through 9, making it the only level with an entire Quranic chapter dedicated to its description and the sins that lead there. The name Al-Hutama translates to the crushing one, or that which breaks to pieces, referring to both the physical torture of crushing pressure and the spiritual anguish that penetrates to the very heart of its inhabitants. According to Islamic scholarly tradition, this level is assigned to Jews who broke their covenant with Allah, particularly those who, according to classical commentators like Ibn Abbas and Ibn Kathir, recognized Prophet Muhammad from descriptions in their own scriptures, but chose to reject and conceal this knowledge. The Quran describes Al-Hutama as the fire of Allah, kindled, which leaps up over the hearts, indicating a form of torment that attacks from within rather than merely burning the external body. Verse 8 of Surah Al-Hijr adds that this fire is closed in on them in outstretched columns, suggesting tall pillars or walls that trap inhabitants in a confined space where crushing pressure combines with internal burning. Beyond the traditional assignment to Jews, Islamic scholars also place in this level those guilty of hams and lams, Arabic terms referring to slander, backbiting, mockery of others, and the accumulation of wealth through forbidden means. The Quranic chapter specifically mentions those who gather wealth and count it obsessively, believing their riches will make them immortal, representing the sin of materialism and economic oppression. Some traditions specify wealthy merchants who exploited the poor or refused to pay zakat despite abundant resources. The punishment links material greed with spiritual corruption, as those who hoarded wealth now face crushing pressure that mirrors the weight of their worldly obsessions. The fire that rises over the hearts symbolizes punishment for internal malice that manifested in harmful actions against others, particularly the vulnerable members of society whom Islam commands believers to protect and support. Sa'ir. Sa'ir is the fourth level of Jahannam, mentioned over 15 times throughout the Quran, making it one of the most frequently referenced names for hell after Jahannam itself. The name Sa'ir means the blaze or the raging flame in Arabic, indicating a significant escalation in the intensity of punishment as one descends deeper into the structure of Islamic hell. According to Islamic tradition, this level is assigned to the Sabians, a religious group mentioned in the Quran whose exact identity has been debated among scholars for centuries, with some suggesting they were ancient star worshippers, while others propose they were a monotheistic group that deviated from true worship of Allah. The Quranic descriptions of Sa'ir are particularly vivid, with Surah Al-Mulk, verses 10 through 11, describing how its inhabitants will admit they did not listen to the warnings sent to them during their worldly lives. What makes Sa'ir unique among the levels is the anthropomorphic quality attributed to its fire, which the Quran describes in Surah Al-Mulk, verse 7, as having a dreadful sound like a roaring furnace that appears to burst with rage. Verse 8 of the same surah states that the fire almost bursts with fury every time a new group is cast into it, suggesting flames that seem alive with emotion and anger toward those being punished. This level also houses those who devoured the property of orphans unjustly, as warned in Surah An-Nisa, verse 10, which states they will have bellies filled with fire, though some scholars debate whether this verse refers specifically to Sa'ir or represents a more general warning about hell. Islamic commentators also place here those who rejected clear signs and messengers despite having evidence of truth presented to them during their lives. Medieval Islamic scholars debated the exact identity of the Sabians, with some suggesting they were the Mandeans, a religious group that still exists today primarily in Iraq and Iran, while others proposed they were ancient groups who worshipped celestial bodies like stars and planets. The roaring sound of Sa'ir, explicitly mentioned in the Quran, creates not just physical pain, but psychological terror, as inhabitants must endure both the burning flames and the constant auditory assault of the fire's rage. This combination of sensory torments represents punishment for those who turned away from divine guidance, despite having their physical senses through which truth could have been perceived. Sakar. Sakar is the fifth level of Jahannam, mentioned prominently in Surah Al-Muddathir, verses 26 through 31, which provides one of the most detailed descriptions of any level of hell found anywhere in the Quran. The name Sakar means scorching heat or burning fire in Arabic, emphasizing the extreme temperature that characterizes this particular level of punishment. According to Islamic tradition, this level is assigned to Zoroastrians, also called Magians or fire worshippers, making their punishment particularly ironic as they are tormented by the very element they once venerated during their earthly lives. The Quran describes Sakar in vivid detail, with verse 28 stating it leaves nothing and spares nothing, while verse 29 specifies that it scorches human skin. Using the Arabic term lawahatun lil bashar, which emphasizes the complete and thorough nature of this burning. What makes Sakar particularly significant in Islamic theology is the explicit mention in verse 30 that over it are 19 angels, serving as guardians and administrators of punishment at this level. This specific numerical detail has been the subject of extensive Islamic scholarship throughout the centuries, with verse 31 explaining that the number serves as a trial for disbelievers and a confirmation for believers, while also being a test for those in whose hearts is disease, and a means for those given scripture to increase in certainty. These 19 guardian angels are described in hadith traditions as being harsh and severe, never disobeying Allah in what He commands them and carrying out exactly what they are ordered to do. Islamic scholars also place in Sakar those who mocked the Quran's descriptions of hell, as verse 31 addresses those who asked skeptically what Allah could possibly intend by such descriptions. The scorching nature of this level is so complete that it destroys the body entirely. But Islamic eschatology teaches that the skin regenerates continuously, so that punishment can continue without end. Some hadith traditions elaborate that this punishment involves a cyclical process of burning, complete destruction, regeneration, and burning again, repeated eternally. The assignment of fire worshippers to this level represents a form of divine justice in Islamic theology, where those who mistakenly elevated a created element to the status of divinity now face that same element as their eternal torment. Al-Jahim. Al-Jahim is the 6th level of Jahannam, mentioned over 25 times in the Quran, making it the second most referenced name for hell after Jahannam itself, which indicates its importance in Islamic warnings about the afterlife. The name Al-Jahim means the fierce fire, the huge fire, or the blazing flame in Arabic, with the term emphasizing both the immense size and the intensity of the flames found at this deep level. According to Islamic tradition, this level is assigned to polytheists and idol worshippers, those who committed the sin of shirk by associating partners with Allah, or worshiping created beings or objects alongside or instead of the one true God. The Quranic descriptions of Al-Jahim are extensive and detailed across multiple chapters, with Surah Ash-Shu'ara, verses 91 through 94, describing how Al-Jahim will be brought forth for those who went astray, and how their false idols will be thrown into the fire alongside their worshippers. This detail of idols being cast into hell alongside those who worship them is significant in Islamic theology, as it demonstrates the complete worthlessness of false gods who cannot save themselves, let alone their followers, from divine punishment. One of the most distinctive features of Al-Jahim is the Zakum tree, described in Surah As-Safat, verses 62 through 67, which grows from the very bottom of this level of hell. The Quran describes the fruit of the Zakum tree as resembling the heads of devils, and inhabitants of Al-Jahim are forced to eat from this tree, despite its bitter and painful nature, then compelled to drink boiling water called hamim to wash it down, which only intensifies their suffering. Surah As-Safat also provides a unique glimpse into conversations that occur in hell, with verses 50 through 68 describing inhabitants conversing with each other about their past lives and the choices that led them to their current torment. Islamic scholars emphasize that Al-Jahim contains those guilty of shirk, which is considered the one unforgivable sin in Islam if a person dies without repenting from it, as stated in Surah An-Nisa, verse 48, which declares that Allah does not forgive association of partners with Him, but may forgive anything less than that for whom He wills. Hawya. Hawya is the seventh and deepest level of Jahannam, mentioned in Surah Al-Hijr, verses 6 through 11, representing the most severe and final destination within the structure of Islamic Hell. The name Hawya means abyss, chasm, or bottomless pit in Arabic, with linguistic roots connected to the concept of falling or plunging downward into unfathomable depths. According to Islamic tradition, this lowest level is reserved for the munafiqeen, the hypocrites who outwardly professed Islam and lived among the Muslim community, but secretly harbored disbelief in their hearts, making them internal enemies who posed danger through deception and betrayal. The assignment of hypocrites to the deepest level is explicitly supported by Surah An-Nisa, verse 145, which states that the hypocrites will be in the lowest depths of the fire, and never will they find for them a helper, indicating both their placement at the bottom and the complete absence of any intercession or reprieve from their punishment. Islamic scholars emphasize that hypocrisy is considered worse than open disbelief because it involves conscious deception, living a lie while undermining the community from within, and pretending faith while plotting against believers. The Quran asks rhetorically in verse 101:9, "And what can make you know what that is?" building suspense before revealing in verse 11 that it is a fire, intensely hot, though the intensity is amplified by the depth and isolation of this bottommost pit. Historical context from the time of Prophet Muhammad in Medina identifies the munafiqeen as individuals who claimed to accept Islam but secretly worked against Muslims, sometimes passing information to enemies or refusing to fight alongside believers during defensive battles. The sins that lead to Hawya include outward profession of faith combined with inner rejection, betrayal of the Muslim community during times of crisis, committing grave sins while maintaining an appearance of piety to deceive others, and using false faith as a cover for harmful actions against believers. Some hadith traditions describe the fall into Hawya as lasting 70 years, emphasizing the immense depth of this abyss, though scholars note this may be metaphorical rather than literal. The emphasis in verse 145, that hypocrites will never find a helper, suggests absolute isolation and abandonment, with no hope of intercession from prophets or angels, representing the ultimate spiritual corruption of knowing truth but consciously rejecting it while pretending otherwise for worldly gain or to cause harm from within the community of believers. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.